Before this video begins, I want to issue a trigger warning. The following is not men's rights related. The topic is cultural Marxism. If you are a cultural Marxist, or a social justice warrior, or a member of the politically correct police, this video may not be suitable for you. You've been trigger warned. Hello everyone, I know you guys are waiting for my MGTOW series, but I want to make another quick lacy green ponage video, and I am also working on an additional MGTOW video I want to get done. In the meantime, I figured I'd share an argument I had with one of my commenters named William Hutton. But before I get into that, I want to quickly show you a picture I photoshopped of Rebecca Watson. Rebecca posted this. She just knew us MRAs would photoshop it. Well, I took the bait, I couldn't resist, so I photoshopped it into a picture of her gobbling a wiener. Yeah, I thought it was clever, she got a kick out of it. Now about the argument that took place in the comments section of my last video. In my video Male Reproductive Rights, a response to the skeptical heretic and Felicia 1717, which, by the way, I think Felicia gave a thumbs up to. I know she told me she gave a thumbs up to my ponage of that Wile E. Coyote guy, because he took the side of some person that pwned her. Oh god, Felicia.
Alka-Seltzer, plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh what a relief it is.
Anyhow, this guy, William Hutton, took issue with something I said in this part of that video.
So let's talk about this. I don't just a disclaimer, I don't self-identify as a feminist or a masculinist or MRA or any of that shit. I think gender politics are a waste of time for the most part. Because if you're dealing with human rights, there are some simple things you can adopt that make sense for everybody regardless of what their plumbing is.
It makes me wonder if you feel the same way about racial civil rights, like, maybe the Negros shouldn't worry about their racial rights, they should just worry about the rights that affect all demographics. I mean, it's like, Pops, don't you think that sometimes the very issue is that one demographic of people can be systematically disadvantaged specifically and deliberately to another demographic, and fighting to remove the systematic disadvantage is a righteous and just cause? Anyhow Gramps, do go on, our teenage ears yearn for your elderly wisdom.
Don't you think that sometimes the very issue is that one demographic of people can be systematically disadvantaged specifically and deliberately to another demographic? And fighting to remove the systematic disadvantage is a righteous and just cause. Irony much? This sounds exactly like a ringing endorsement of the dreaded cultural Marxism that you railed against in the last video. I waited for the punchline, but since none was forthcoming I assume you're just a hypocrite. Or you made a boo-boo and forgot you don't go for that cultural Marxism crap, while using language that is practically indistinguishable from that school of philosophy? If there was sarcasm here, please fill me in on where the joke starts. Is it where you do or don't adhere to the words within the quotation marks? This is where I predict this comment will be ignored, or I'll have to stave off a barrage of unnecessary semantic arguments. Or strawmen claiming I don't support men's rights. Of course I do. I'm a man and an anti-feminist. Perhaps I'll be accused of failing to understand the real or true meaning of cultural Marxism. It shouldn't have to be stated, but there's always the troll factor to account for as well.
I was describing the basis for a civil rights movement, that one demographic of people is deliberately disadvantaged to another. Cultural Marxism is not the same thing as a civil rights struggle. Cultural Marxism, at its root, is the insistence that if there is inequality of outcome, discrimination and only discrimination must be the reason, and therefore special handouts must be given. A group of people asking for an equality of opportunity is not the same thing as asking that government take from one group of people and give to another to absolutely force an equal outcome. Another theme of cultural Marxism, in its current incarnation at least, is the anti-white, anti-straight, anti-cis, anti-male attitude. It is a bigotry that is the reverse of the older bigotry, which is still bigotry. At no point in time did my statement that you are quoting contain elements of either of those two things. Notice I put the words specifically and deliberately in that sentence that you're quoting. There is a difference between a blacks need not apply policy which is deliberately disadvantaging them, versus the just not being that many blacks that work there. Those are two different things. That is, a civil rights movement is not the same thing as cultural Marxism. Out of curiosity though, are you bringing up this alleged hypocrisy because you are a leftist fundamentalist that doesn't like me bashing cultural Marxism? Or are you a right-wing fundamentalist that just sees cultural Marxism around every corner and suspects I am secretly a leftist infiltrator coming to get ya? Or is it that you don't really know what cultural Marxism is? Or is it that you have low reading comprehension and thus missed the deliberately and specifically statement?
It appears my predictive powers were better than I'd anticipated. You seem to have run the gamut, with the obvious exception to ignoring my comment, through the final paragraph of my previous post. Your colloquial understanding of CM is not entirely unexpected but inaccurate nonetheless. I would appreciate some objective citations regarding your facile comprehension of said theory and critique that lead you to this misconception. Enlighten me on how the word specifically and deliberately, in any way, diminishes the definition of CM? It is a critique on cultural habits and institutions that seem natural yet, for all accounts and purposes, they're ideological and that leads to justifying and maintaining a hierarchy. Specific hierarchies, for example race, gender, etc., can specifically and deliberately oppress another race, gender, etc., to preserve a hierarchy, status quo. My political leanings are irrelevant. It seems yours blinds you though. You did jump to conclusions awful quickly about my reasons for calling you out, leaving me three undesirable options that don't necessarily follow from my critique of a single aspect of a couple of your videos. I just thought I'd remind you that some individuals have a memory longer than the space between two videos. Some of those individuals are also educated. But to ease a bit of your curiosity, I am a simple anti-theist and anti-feminist blogger. I also have, in the past, sent friends over to your old, before the shiny new, channel. I feel like any voice in the struggle for men's rights is worth listening to. I would be remiss, however, if I didn't call people on their bullshit. And you, sir, are full of it. In the interim, while I wait with bated breath for those references and resources on cultural Marxism, you should ponder the possible reasons why your peers decidedly quit bandying about that term so recklessly.
It appears my predictive powers were better than I'd anticipated. You come here mistaking my description of a civil rights movement, even when I used the words civil rights, for a description of cultural Marxism, and claim that I will argue back that you don't understand cultural Marxism. You are taking issue with the semantics of something I said, and predicting I will argue with semantics. I think that's what is called a self-fulfilling prophecy. You might as well say to someone I think you are a worthless piece of shit and you should die. P.S. I suspect you're not going to take kindly to my statement, and then doing a victory dance when that person is in fact upset at your statement. You then add, I would accuse you of not being a men's rights activist. I did no such thing, so you're wrong. I pondered whether you might be a leftist fundamentalist or a right-wing fundamentalist. I never said you weren't an MRA or anti-feminist of sorts. You also said you'd be accused of being a troll. I never accused you of that, so you're wrong. You also said you predicted you'd be ignored. You weren't, thus you were wrong. So what you've done is basically look at all the possibilities, and rule out me saying OMG dude you're so right, and then predicting all of the other logical responses, and you think you have great powers of prediction for this? Yeah well, I'm gonna write to a really popular YouTuber like PewDiePie and insist that Let's Plays are overrated, and I predict he will agree, disagree, or ignore me, who here thinks I just might be right about one of those three things. Dude, you're silly. Enlighten me on how the words specifically and deliberately, in any way, diminishes the definition of CM. Okay, before I get into that, you need to understand that something like cultural Marxism is subjective, like feminism and patriarchy. The actual definition, and the actual meaning tend to not be the exact same thing. After all, feminism is about equality for women, according to definition. I know, I am using a semantic argument just like your psychic powers predicted. I am insisting that you do not understand the phrase you are referring to. Again, your psychic powers rock, dude. But I tell you what, even within the definition you have lifted from Wikipedia, I will actually do as you asked and explain how my words deliberate and specifically diminishes the definition of cultural Marxism, which technically you mean to say diminishes your interpretation that my comment on the civil rights movement equals the definition of cultural Marxism. My answer is this, also from Wiki. Cultural Marxists use Marxist methods, historical research, the identification of economic interest, the study of the mutually conditioning relations between parts of a social order, to try to understand the complexity of power in contemporary society and to make it possible to criticize what cultural Marxists propose, appears natural but is in fact ideological. The tail end of that, on the subject of social power, says appears natural but is in fact ideological. If a civil inequality is the direct and unmistakable result of a deliberate and specific law or course of action, then it is known in advance to not be naturally occurring. That is, it is ideological if it is deliberate and specific. Thus the words appears natural is non-applicable. Again, that's just using the definition you pulled off of Wikipedia. I didn't have to pull up some non-commonly accepted interpretation of the subjective concept. I actually used the wiki article you pasted from. I think I have clearly delivered exactly what you just asked for. Maybe you're just not getting this. Let me try again. If a corporation says Negroes need not apply, then the lack of black people working for that company is not assumed to be the result of nature, natural. It is known and accepted that the lack of black people working there is ideologically driven by policy, a specific policy, that clearly and deliberately excludes, disadvantages them. Fighting against the Negroes need not apply policy is not cultural Marxism, it's a civil rights struggle. Cultural Marxism is more like if you took note that there were little to no black people in water polo, and yet there is no policy excluding blacks. Thus it would appear natural, rather than specific and deliberate, and you insisted that even though it appears to be the natural outcome of free choice, it is in reality an ideologically driven outcome, then that would be cultural Marxism. And I just know you're doing your little gotcha victory dance because your psychic powers were right again, and I am using semantics, but sir, you are coming at me with a semantic argument. I have no retort available but a semantic argument. Again, a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. My political leanings are irrelevant. No, actually it isn't. There's a reason you took this tiny little thing I said, this one tiny little insignificant thing, misunderstood what I said, and/or misunderstood what cultural Marxism is, thereby assuming a logical contradiction when in reality what you have is a semantic misinterpretation, and chose to make a great to-do about it on a video that had nothing to do with cultural Marxism. Clearly you have some political-based motive, some strong vested interest in cultural Marxism, to inspire this. In order to clear up why you are misinterpreting my statement, it would be helpful to know where you're coming from. Thus asking your political allegiance was relevant. After all, I am claiming that my description of a civil rights movement is a reference to a civil rights movement. I even started off that clip at 5:30 by saying the words civil rights movement followed by the basic premise of a civil rights movement in my own words. At no point in time did I say cultural Marxism in that clip. I said civil rights movement. Let me ask you something, and I really do want an answer to this. Do you believe that a civil rights movement and cultural Marxism are the same thing? But to ease a bit of your curiosity, I am a simple anti-theist and anti-feminist blogger, neither of which has anything to do with cultural Marxism, which still begs the question, why, in a video that had nothing to do with cultural Marxism, would you take a poetic description of civil rights and assume I just gave you the definition of cultural Marxism, and feel the need to make this big deal out of it with grand predictions that I will ignore you or call you a troll or bombard you with semantics, and all this preemptive defensive shit? Clearly there is a motive behind this that goes beyond a simple apparent contradiction in logic. You must have strong feelings about the subject of cultural Marxism. So tell me, what are those feelings? Tell me your feelings on cultural Marxism. I want to hear them. You should ponder the possible reasons why your peers decidedly quit bandying about that term so recklessly. No, if you have something to say, a point to make, don't beat around the bush. Don't ask me to ponder it. Don't pussyfoot around. You got something to say, then say it.
First, I'll begin with a capitulation. You did not attack me on whether or not I supported men's rights or not. I said you ran the gamut and I was in error in my choice of words. Of course, I did mention that I wasn't a proponent of men's rights, so why would anyone have needed to strawman against it? Having stated that, there's still issues. 1. I am using a semantic argument just like your psychic powers predicted. Are you really that disingenuous to dismiss my predictive statements as prophecy? It's often that those with a political axe to grind are often so predictable in their arguments that I felt it was necessary to point a few out in advance to discourage some of your more vocal defenders. It was preparatory, not to be confused with psychic lunacy or self-fulfilling prophecy. 2. You also said you'd be accused of being a troll. No, I didn't. I stated there's always the troll factor to account for, as in I would be trolled for stepping out of line. 3. But I tell you what, even within the definition you have lifted from Wikipedia. And my answer is this, also from Wiki. And again, that's just using the definition you pulled off of Wikipedia. Several points to be made here. A. I did not get my definition of CM from any online source, but thank you for referring me to the page nonetheless. It contains a few citations to books I'd previously read and some I hadn't. b. There's nothing wrong with using online search engines and sources, provided you have the skills to differentiate between what is objective and subjective and can overcome confirmation bias. c. Where, if not a wiki, do you acquire your misconceptions? Are you simply making up facts as you go along or just regurgitating nonsense from others within your political spectrum? d. I don't use Wikipedia often, but when I do, it's mostly as a quick reference to cited and published works. I tend not to rely heavily on information that can be altered by dubious means. e. Just because it and I used similar definitions doesn't discredit either. f. If you're concerned with my use of that tool, then why use it yourself to attempt to, fallaciously, attack me with it? g. You thrice accused me of plagiarism, yet you unequivocally pasted that material to try and make your argument. You're duplicitous and hypocritical to the extreme. 4. The actual definition, and the actual meaning tends to not be the exact same thing, and if a civil inequality is the direct and unmistakable result of a deliberate and specific law or course of action, then it is known in advance to not be naturally occurring. That is, it is ideological if it is deliberate and specific, thus the words appears natural is non-applicable. If something appears natural to a certain demographic doesn't mean it wasn't deliberately positioned there intentionally by members of a cultural hierarchy as a means of controlling that demographic. Appearing one way doesn't remove an underlying intent. Placebo effect. It does not follow, non sequitur, that just because something is deliberate and specific, it isn't also natural or with the facade of such. Lions deliberately stalk prey for food, this is natural. Christians believe gay marriage is unnatural and deliberately and specifically fight to maintain the laws that would see homosexuals fail at achieving civil equality. They believe this is a natural dictate from their deity. They gather momentum and confidence from the numbers of other like-minded, traditionalist fools parroting that idea, so it feeds back onto itself, perpetuating an illusion of naturally occurring properties. 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong, right? Ad populum. The progenitors of this nation believed that certain rights were natural, innate, self-evident and inherent. Which they are not. So, you're still wrong. Because you have a colloquial understanding of a subject doesn't mean you have an academic or formal understanding of it. Your conventional understanding doesn't make it a true or real grasp of knowledge on that subject. Which is precisely why I stated it in my original post. 5. Fighting against the Negroes need not apply policy is not cultural Marxism, if, understand the complexity of power in contemporary society and criticizing, and making it possible to do so, that which appears natural but is in fact ideological, then you failed to comprehend the very definition of scium that you proposed. Note the word criticize as a term to describe disapproval or an attack. Many whites in modernity, not unlike the not-too-distant past, believed blacks were an inferior race, not subject to demonstrable equality. I don't think references are needed to ferret that fact out. If true, and it is, then, deliberately denying blacks a seat at the corporate table by upholding and creating new laws to maintain that idea, is as natural as making sure that dogs don't eat from the same table as whites. Genetic fallacy, mutually conditioning relations between parts of a social order. 6. Civil rights. The rights of citizens to political and social freedom and equality. If you agree to this definition of civil rights, then your semantic argument just failed. It's virtually indistinguishable from understanding cultural and societal power constructs and fighting against those constructs for the purpose of equality. Don't mistake rights for being natural. Paying lip service to inherent and natural rights don't make it so. Civil rights, and its implications, are not mutually exclusive from the theory of cultural Marxism. As I said, practically indistinguishable. 7. If the definition of scium that you gave corresponds to your own beliefs as to what it is, then why all the hate? If fighting against inequality is your thing, then how is the theory according to your included definition detract from that struggle? It seems to be a method in line with as righteous and just a tool, and as indistinguishable, as the one you propose. So why attempt to curtail my observation with unnecessary semantics? You've proven nothing except your brand of sarcasm doesn't require wit. 8. At no point in time did I say cultural Marxism in that clip. I said civil rights movement. An unimportant distinction for the point of my criticism. As I stated earlier, It is me pointing out past hypocrisies of you and you demonstrating a lack of understanding of complex terms. I say Pac-Man, you say a pixelated disc that often chased by ghosts and devours dots. Unnecessarily captious. 9. My political leanings are still irrelevant. I don't need to be some fundamentalist to point out errors. If you said chickens were mammals, then I don't need to be party to the great chicken conspiracy to point out the error. My motives, as I pointed to expressly, was to call you on your bullshit. It doesn't take some self-imposed caricature of a political fundie to critique you. 10. There are so many more things wrong with your defense that it's almost laughable. But I'll tentatively end it here with saying, you misunderstand the term in the same novelesque polemic you define it. So, how can you accuse me of being intellectually inferior when you failed to differentiate the terms in any objective and meaningful way? I doubt you'll have read through this, though I attempted to simplify points by number and letters, but it should be stated, nonetheless.
You thrice accused me of plagiarism, yet you unequivocally pasted that material to try and make your argument. You're duplicitous and hypocritical to the extreme. You're serious. Wow. Anyhow, I'm sorry I accused you of just copying and pasting a sentence from the wiki article. I seen the wiki article and a statement I thought was your quote. I originally went to wiki as a starting point of delivering a definition, and then seen a sentence, thought it was the quote you gave me. On second inspection, I was wrong. You did not paste from wiki. At any rate, the bit about appears natural which was staring me in the face on wiki, was all I needed to deliver exactly what you asked for, a citation showing that the phrase specifically and deliberately differentiates my description of a civil rights movement from CM. I wasn't actually accusing you of plagiarism, so much as grabbing from a generic and oversimplified source that only briefly outlines what cultural Marxism is, which I was trying to convey to you, is about as effective as the feminists saying the dictionary says feminism is equality for women. So you have no right to say it's a hate movement, that's not in the definition, and I just found it ironic that even in the most simple generic overview of the basic premise of cultural Marxism, it actually did provide the exact example you were looking for. But anyhow, moving on, I'm not going to argue your points, point by point, and here is why. I, and Wikipedia, am talking about natural as in, not being caused by effort, not being the result of effort, not being done on purpose, not being forced to happen. Natural as in it just so happens to be, natural as in no one is forcing this circumstance to take place. You are using natural to mean instinctive, neurological, biological, etc. I'm saying if there is a group of people who are underrepresented in some field, their lack of presence is either naturally occurring, or is the result of discrimination. No one is claiming it is the result of fucking biology, instinctive neurological driven behavior. Instinct is not the thing being brought into question. Whether or not there is a deliberate force holding them back, forcing them out of that field, is the question. That wiki quote that says appears to be natural, is not saying appears to be human instinct. That is not the usage. It is using the word natural to mean is not caused by a deliberate effort to create inequality. Therefore it is saying appears not to be deliberate. You're talking about the old-fashioned slave-era belief whites had that blacks were naturally inferior, and therefore it felt natural for whites to deliberately discriminate against blacks. You're talking about whether homosexuality is natural, and the deliberate effort to stop them. You're talking about a lion's natural instinct to deliberately stalk prey. You're using the word natural to mean instinctive drive, or biology, or God's will. Natural in the sense that I, and Wikipedia, is using the word natural to mean not deliberate, not due to intention. If you are poor, because your mama and daddy were poor, and you just don't have a job, your poverty is natural because no one deliberately made you poor. No one is meaning you are poor due to your instincts. If you are poor because I robbed you and took your shit, then there is a deliberate effort to make you poor. If you are not allowed to work because of your race, gender, religion, sexuality, or whatever, then you are poor as a result of a deliberate effort to keep you down. If you are gambling at a casino, and you keep losing and losing and losing, and you're all out of money, this is a naturally occurring phenomenon. If however, you are losing because the game is rigged, and there is someone deliberately causing the dice to roll losing numbers, then it is not natural that you are losing, it is deliberate. The cultural Marxist insists that because he is losing at the table more than anyone else, the game must be rigged against him, and he can't prove it, so it only appears to be natural chance. I say prove it or shut the fuck up. Again, the word natural is meaning occurring without a deliberate effort. The words appears to be natural means occurs by deliberate effort that is hidden, not obvious, and therefore only appears to be a natural occurrence. Again, to that I say proof or get the fuck out. No one, neither me, nor Wikipedia, is saying natural as in biologically driven, or God's will, or any of that shit you are talking about. You say this, civil rights, and its implications, are not mutually exclusive from the theory of cultural Marxism. As I said, practically indistinguishable. Therefore you're basically confessing to being a cultural Marxist. If that term bothers you, I'll rephrase it, you're a social justice warrior. There is a difference between fighting for an equal opportunity, versus fighting for an equal outcome on the premise that must be, just absolutely must be, some kind of discrimination causing the inequality of outcome. Thus we must force an outcome. I stated this exact thing in the last video I mentioned cultural Marxism in, that you are referring to, so I am not telling you anything I haven't already told you. There is in fact a difference between the fight for equal opportunity, and the fight for an equal outcome. If you, however, don't believe there is, or feel these two things are practically indistinguishable, then you are confessing that you believe the fight for equal opportunity and the fight for an equal outcome are one and the same. That is, you are a cultural Marxist. I asked you what your feelings on cultural Marxism were. You never gave me a direct answer, and you are still hiding behind the pretense of I'm just pointing out an apparent hypocrisy. You continue to mention I am using semantics. I am going to continue to remind you that semantics is the only thing you have. I have to answer your semantic question with a semantic answer. I asked you if you thought a civil rights movement and cultural Marxism were the same thing. You have not answered that question. I have inferred that you do indeed believe they are. I have interpreted your gibberish to mean so, but you haven't had the courage or the honesty to just come out and answer that question. I have asked you to tell me whether or not you subscribe to left politics or right politics. You have not answered left, right, or neither, only that you don't need to belong to one or the other to spot a hypocrisy blah blah blah. You have not come out and answered that question directly. I have asked you to answer the question of why you think my fellow MRAs use the phrase cultural Marxist less. You wanted me to ponder this. I asked you to spill it and tell me, but again, you refuse to answer that. You, sir, have the luxury of looking through nearly 100 hours of my videos, to understand where I am coming from. I don't know anything about where you're coming from, where you stand, and you avoid answering my questions. If you have neither the courage or the honesty to answer my questions, I have no need to continue discussing anything with you.
We've talked about cultural Marxism a lot and political correctness all the time. That's the basis of this channel. But I think that I need to do a real brief introduction again on what cultural Marxism is. We always get guys on here. Kids are programmed today to, when they hear the word Marxism, think, that's an idiot. That's some kind of rube. That's a hater who's saying that. I get these leftist MRAs with their little kitty cattery coming here and they go, you're Joe McCarthy. You have a list of leftists in your pocket. And they say things like that. You cannot get the other side to accurately tell you what they believe in. They attack you. They won't even tell you what their beliefs are. It's almost impossible to debate somebody when you're the only one who's taking a position.
Oh good Lord, ain't that the truth?